I was the world's most famous Muslim apologist. 50 million subscribers across platforms. 25 years of debates on 5 continents without a single public defeat. Books in Islamic bookstores across 20 countries. A television studio in Dubai and a weekly live show that reached more Muslim households than any Islamic apologetics platform in history. I was the man the Muslim world called when Christianity needed to be answered, when Christian missionaries needed to be stopped, when young Muslims needed to be armed with arguments against the faith that was trying to reach them. I was Dr. Kabir Rahman. And on the night that I am about to describe, the night that 20 million people watched me fall apart on live television and the world assumed it was a medical emergency, I was sitting at the peak of everything I had built, about to participate in the debate that was supposed to be the crown of my entire career, completely unaware that the person I had spent 25 years arguing against had decided that enough was enough and was about to walk into my studio and end the argument himself. I was sitting across the debate table looking like a man who knew he was losing. My production team was in my earpiece telling me I was doing brilliantly. My notes were perfectly organized in front of me. I had prepared for this debate for 4 months. I had dismantled every argument Christianity had ever produced against Islamic theology, and I had arranged those dismantled pieces into a presentation so airtight that I genuinely believe no honest person watching could walk away unconvinced. I was quoting a Quranic verse. The words were in my mouth. I had quoted this verse 10,000 times in 25 years of public ministry, and then I stopped. Not because I forgot the words, not because something interrupted me, not because of any technical failure or physical symptom or anything that the production team or the 20 million viewers or the medical team that would later rush onto that set could have identified as a cause. I stopped because there was someone standing in my studio, standing in brilliant, impossible light behind the Christian pastor I had been systematically defeating for the past 40 minutes, standing in a place where there was no one standing a moment before, looking directly at me with eyes that I had spent 25 years telling the world did not belong to God. 20 million people were watching me and only I could see him. And in the moment that I saw him, everything I had spent 25 years building, the arguments, the books, the 50 million subscribers, the reputation, the career, the absolute unshakable certainty, all of it cracked from the inside like a structure that has been hit by something it was never designed to withstand. My name is Dr. Kabir Rahman. I was the Muslim world's most famous apologist, and Jesus came to my studio and stood behind my opponent and looked at me while the cameras rolled. This is what happened after that night. I need to give you enough background to understand what was at stake in that studio. Not much. I am not interested in making this testimony about my credentials or my career because the credentials and the career are the things I am confessing, not celebrating. I will say only this. I had memorized the Quran by 12. I studied at Al-Azhar University in Cairo, the oldest and most prestigious Islamic institution in the world. I earned a doctorate in comparative religion, which meant I did not just know Islam deeply. I knew Christianity deeply too, or I believed I did. I knew its texts, its history, its theological arguments, its internal debates and contradictions. I knew the Christian case better than most Christians knew it. I knew it specifically so I could dismantle it. I was very good at dismantling it. 48 years old, based in Dubai with a television studio and a production company, and a weekly live show called Truth Revealed that aired across the Middle East and streamed globally. 50 million subscribers across platforms. A wife, Aisha. 3 children who had grown up watching their father be one of the most respected voices in the Islamic world. Books in Islamic bookstores across 20 countries. I had debated hundreds of Christian scholars and pastors and apologists over 25 years. I had never lost a debate, not officially, not in any way that my audience would have recognized as losing. What I am about to tell you is that I had lost something far more important than every debate I had ever won for years before that night in the studio. But I did not know how to look at that loss directly, so I kept winning debates instead. The debate that changed everything was scheduled as the crown of my career. A live televised event from my Dubai studio. My opponent was a well-known American Christian apologist, a man with serious credentials and a genuine gift for public communication. The topic was the question I had answered publicly 1,000 times. Is Jesus God or merely a prophet? 20 million live viewers, my largest audience ever. My production team had been building promotional material for weeks. The Islamic media world was watching. This was not just a debate, it was a statement. A demonstration that the most fundamental claim of Christianity could be publicly dismantled by Islamic scholarship in front of the largest possible audience. I had prepared for 4 months. My arguments were organized into a sequence I had refined over 25 years of public debate and sharpened specifically for this night. The Bible has been corrupted, demonstrably, historically, textually. The Trinity is a concept with no basis in the original teachings of Jesus, a later theological invention. Jesus himself never made an unambiguous claim to divinity in the earliest gospel traditions. The resurrection accounts are contradictory and rely entirely on secondary testimony. Muhammad came to correct the distortions that had accumulated in the centuries between Jesus and the 7th century. This was not a replacement of truth, but a restoration of it. These were not new arguments. They were my arguments. I had used them 1,000 times. I believed them the way I believed in my own existence. Not as positions I had chosen, but as realities I had verified and lived inside for my entire adult life. Or I had believed them that way. There is something I need to confess here that I have spent months working up the courage to confess publicly. In the years before that night, I would say the last 5 years, though if I am being fully honest it goes back further, there were moments in my debates when I knew, not consciously, not in a way I was willing to examine directly, but somewhere underneath the performance of absolute certainty, I knew that some of my arguments were weaker than I was presenting them. I knew that certain Christian scholars had raised points that I had deflected with rhetoric rather than answered with substance. I knew that the historical case for the resurrection was more serious than I was willing to publicly acknowledge. I knew that my dismissal of the New Testament's textual reliability was more selective than rigorous. I knew, and I kept debating anyway, because I was Dr. Kabir Rahman, because I had 50 million subscribers, because the Islamic world had made me its champion, and the champion does not stand up in front of 20 million people and say, actually, I have been overstating the case. I am telling you this now because what happened in that studio cannot be fully understood without understanding that the ground underneath my certainty had been quietly giving way for years. Jesus did not appear to a man in the full strength of his convictions. He appeared to a man who had been performing full strength for years while the actual foundations cracked in private. The debate began at 8 in the evening Dubai time. For the first 40 minutes it went exactly as I had planned. My opponent was good, genuinely good, better than many I had faced. But I was better in the specific environment of live televised debate. I had presence, I had preparation, I had the home advantage of my own studio and my own audience. I moved through my arguments with the fluency of someone who has made them so many times that they require no conscious effort. They simply flow, polished and sequenced, and delivered with the particular confidence that 25 years of practice produces. My production team was happy. I could feel the audience responding. My opponent was holding his own, but he was not ahead. Then I moved to my argument about the crucifixion. This was always one of my most powerful moments in debates about the nature of Jesus. The Quranic position that Jesus was not crucified, that what appeared to happen on the cross was an illusion, that the central claim of Christian theology rests on an event that did not occur. I'd made this argument hundreds of times. I began to quote the relevant verse. I got 4 words in. And then the lights changed. I need to be precise about this because I've been asked about it many times and I want to be accurate. The studio lighting did not malfunction. The overhead lights did not flicker or surge. What changed was something that the cameras did not capture and that nobody else in the room appeared to notice. A quality of brightness that entered the space from no identifiable source and settled, specifically in the area behind my opponent. To my left as I faced the cameras, I looked toward it before I understood why I was looking. He was standing there. I am a man who has spent 25 years analyzing, categorizing, debating, and dismissing claims about Jesus. I have read every serious scholarly work on the historical Jesus. I have studied the Gospel accounts in their original Greek. I have examined the theological development of the doctrine of the Incarnation across 2,000 years of Christian thought. I know the arguments for and against every major claim Christianity makes about who Jesus was. None of that prepared me for seeing him. Because seeing him was not an argument. Arguments I knew how to handle. Arguments I had a quarter century of training and experience to evaluate and respond to. What was standing in the light behind my opponent was not an argument. It was a person, present in my studio with the full weight of actual presence. The way any real person is present in a room, occupying space, displacing air, existing with the undeniable particularity of someone who is actually there. He was not performing for me. He was not presenting a case. He was simply standing there, in brilliant white, looking at me with an expression that I can only describe by saying it contained my entire life. He did not speak audibly. The studio microphones would have captured audible speech, and the footage from that night, which has been reviewed many times, records nothing unusual in the audio. What happened was not audible. It was direct, a communication that bypassed the channel of sound entirely and arrived in the center of me with the precision of something that knew exactly where it was going. He said, "And I am giving you these words as faithfully as I am able, that I had spent 25 years fighting against him, that I had led millions away from truth while presenting myself as a seeker of truth, that I had twisted his words and denied his sacrifice and used my considerable intellectual gifts to harden hearts against him, that I knew the arguments against Christianity as well as any person alive and had never once genuinely sought to know him," he said. And this is the part that broke something in me that has not been repaired and does not need to be repaired. He said that he was standing in front of me, that I could see him, that I knew he was real, and he asked me one question. He asked me, "Will you continue to deny what you can see with your own eyes?" And then he showed me something. The best word I have for it is a vision, though that word is insufficient. It was more like being made to see clearly, having clarity forced upon you the way strong light forces your pupils to adjust whether you choose it or not. He showed me moments from my own career, not a flattering selection. The debates where I had known my argument was weaker than I was presenting it and had used rhetoric to cover the weakness. The moments of private doubt that I had suppressed so efficiently that I had almost stopped noticing them. The faces of people, specific faces, people I had no conscious memory of, who had been genuinely searching for truth and had encountered my arguments and turned away from Jesus because of them. And he showed me something about myself that I had spent 25 years refusing to look at directly. My love of being right. My need to be the champion. The way my defense of Islam had at some point, gradually and without any single moment of obvious crossing, become less about truth and more about Kabir Rahman winning. The pride that I had dressed in the robes of religious devotion for so long that I could no longer see the seam between them. He showed me all of this in what could not have been more than a few seconds of clock time, and I was frozen in my seat on live television with 20 million people watching. I am told by the production team that my silence lasted approximately 45 seconds before the host intervened. 45 seconds of dead air on a live broadcast is an eternity. I am told that my face during those 45 seconds was the face of someone who was experiencing something that the normal categories of human expression do not cover. Not pain exactly, not fear, something else. Something that the production team and the host and my opponent and the 20 million viewers had no category for, because they had not seen what I was seeing. The host asked if I was all right. I could hear him. The question reached me from a very great distance. The way sounds reach you when you are underwater and someone is speaking above the surface. I understood the words and could not respond to them. My opponent, the Christian pastor I had been defeating for 40 minutes, leaned forward and asked quietly if we should take a break. There was genuine concern on his face. Not the concern of a debater who senses an advantage, the concern of a human being watching another human being struggle with something real. I tried to speak. I tried to return to the argument I had been making. I tried to locate the Quranic verse in my memory. The verse I had quoted 10,000 times, that lived in me the way all memorized text lives in the person who has internalized it completely. I could not find it, not because it was gone, it was still there, because something had happened to my relationship with the certainty that usually sat behind those words like a foundation, and without that certainty the words had no force and would not come. My voice, when it finally came, was not my voice. It was the voice of a man who has just seen something that has restructured his understanding of reality and has not yet figured out how to speak from inside the new structure. I said something. I do not fully remember what I said. The footage exists. I have been told I said approximately half a sentence about the historicity of the crucifixion accounts before my voice stopped working entirely. Then I was hyperventilating. Then I was crying. Then the studio crew was around me, and someone was calling for a medical team, and the cameras cut to a technical difficulties screen, and I was being helped off the set, and I was still seeing him. Not in the same way as the initial vision, but the afterimage of it, burned into the inside of my awareness, the way looking at a bright light leaves its impression in your vision long after you look away. The official statement released by my production company that night said that Dr. Kabir Rahman had experienced a medical emergency, possibly cardiac in nature, and that the broadcast had been suspended out of concern for his health. I was taken to a hospital. The doctors found nothing physically wrong with me. They ran every test available to them. My heart was functioning normally. My brain showed no signs of stroke or neurological event. Every physical system was operating exactly as it should for a healthy 48-year-old man. There was nothing wrong with me physically. Everything had changed in every other way. They discharged me from the hospital the following morning. Physically clear. That is what the report said. Physically clear. I sat in the back of the vehicle that took me from the hospital to my home in Dubai, and I held that report in my hands, and I thought about what physically clear means when the thing that happened to you was not physical. When what entered your studio and stood behind your opponent and looked at you with your entire life in its eyes was not a cardiac event or a neurological episode or any category that a hospital report has a box for. Ayesha was waiting at home. She had been at the hospital, but I had asked for time alone, and she had respected that with the particular careful respect of a wife who knows when her husband is somewhere she cannot reach and has decided that pushing will not help. She made tea. She sat across from me in our sitting room, and she looked at me with eyes that were trying to read something that her existing understanding of me was not giving her the vocabulary for. She said, "What happened in that studio?" I said, "I am not ready to talk about it yet." She accepted that. She should not have had to accept it alone for as long as she did. That is one of the many things I am sorry for. I went to my office. I closed the door. I sat in the chair where I had prepared 1,000 arguments and written 4 books and planned the systematic dismantling of the faith that had just sent its founder to stand in my studio and look at me in front of 20 million people. And I sat with what I had seen. I want to tell you about the 3 days after the debate because those 3 days are the part of this story that I think matters most for anyone who is where I was, not the dramatic public moment, not the breakdown on live television, but the private reckoning that happens when the cameras are off and the production team has gone home and you are alone with what you know. I am a scholar. Whatever else I am and whatever I have done with my scholarship, the training is real. I have spent my life in the discipline of evaluating evidence and constructing arguments and testing claims against the available information. That training did not disappear because of what I saw in that studio. In some ways, it intensified, because the scholar in me immediately began doing what scholars do with extraordinary claims. I began examining what I had experienced with the same rigor I had applied to everything else. And this is what I found when I examined it honestly. I could not explain it away. I had every tool available to explain religious experiences away. The neurological explanations, the psychological explanations, the sociological explanations for why human beings generate apparently transcendent experiences, particularly under stress. I knew all of these frameworks. I had used several of them against Christian testimony in my career. and I sat in my office and I applied every one of them to what I had seen in that studio, and not one of them was sufficient. Not because the frameworks were wrong in general, but because what I had seen was not vague, it was not symbolic, it was not the kind of experience that requires interpretation, or that could have been generated by a mind under stress producing comforting imagery. It was specific. It showed me specific moments from my own career that I had carefully suppressed. It named things about my own private experience that I had never spoken aloud to anyone. It was not a projection of my subconscious, because my subconscious had been very carefully not looking at the things it showed me. You cannot generate in yourself the precise content of what you have most carefully avoided knowing. By the end of the first day, I had not concluded anything, but I had concluded that the explanation I most wanted, that this was a medical event, a stress response, a psychologically generated experience, was not going to hold under honest scrutiny. The scholar in me would not let it hold. That is the thing about spending your life committed to intellectual rigor. It does not selectively apply itself only to the claims of other people. When you turn it on yourself, it works just as well, and it was telling me that what I had seen deserved to be taken seriously as evidence. By the end of the second day, I was doing something I had not done in 25 years of professional engagement with Christian material. I was reading the New Testament without an agenda, not to find the weaknesses, not to identify the contradictions, not to prepare a counter-argument, just reading, the way I had been trained at Al-Azhar to read primary texts, with attention, with patience, with a willingness to let the text say what it actually says before you decide what to do with it. And what I found was not what I had been presenting to audiences for 25 years. I need to stop here and say something that is one of the most difficult things in this entire testimony. More difficult than describing what I saw. More difficult than describing the breakdown on live television. More difficult than telling you about my family. What I found when I read the New Testament honestly was that I had been wrong. Not about everything. Not about every argument I had ever made. Some of the textual questions I had raised were legitimate Galilei questions that serious Christian scholars also engage with. I am not saying I had invented difficulties out of nothing, but the overall case I had been making, the case that Jesus never claimed to be God, that the resurrection is historically implausible, that the New Testament is too corrupted and too late to tell us anything reliable about the historical Jesus, that Muhammad's revelation was a correction of Christian distortion rather than a new departure from the original monotheism of Jesus. That overall case was not as strong as I had been presenting it to be. I knew the opposing evidence. I had always known it. I had known for years that serious historians, including non-Christian historians with no theological agenda, took the resurrection accounts more seriously than I was publicly willing to acknowledge. I had known that the earliest Christian testimony, which predates the Gospels and is found in Paul's letters, was too early to be dismissed as legendary development. I had known that Jesus' statements in the Gospel of John were not easily explained away as later theological additions without doing significant violence to the textual and historical evidence. I had known all of this and had argued against it anyway because that was my job and my identity and my career. Sitting in my office in Dubai in the days after what happened in that studio, reading the text I had spent my career attacking, I felt something that I can only describe as the particular shame of a scholar who realizes he has not been doing scholarship. He has been doing advocacy dressed as scholarship. And the difference between those two things, when you finally see it clearly, is devastating. I read for days. I watched testimonies of former Muslims who had encountered Jesus, men and women who had been where I was, inside Islam, and had found their way to the same person who had appeared in my studio. I read the historical scholarship on the resurrection that I had dismissed in debates without actually engaging with its best arguments. I read early church documents. I read the accounts of the first believers, people who had died for the claim that Jesus rose from the dead, at a time and in a place where they could have been easily refuted if the claim had no basis. And the more I read, the more the ground continued to give way. He came to me again on the 11th night after the debate. I was in my office. It was past 2 in the morning. Ayesha was asleep. The house was completely quiet. I had been reading for hours. And I had reached a point that I think every honest investigator reaches eventually, the point where the evidence has accumulated past the threshold of reasonable doubt, and what remains is not an intellectual question but a personal one. Not, is this true? I had moved past that question. But what am I going to do with the fact that it is true? He was in the room before I was aware of any transition. No light this time, or rather the light was less dramatic, more like the quality of presence I now associated with him regardless of whether it was visible as light or not. He was simply there, in my office, among my books, books I had written against him, books by scholars I had cited against him, books whose arguments I was now dismantling in my private reading the way I had once used them to dismantle the faith of others. He did not show me another vision. He did not make another speech. He simply looked at me with the same expression he had carried in the studio, that expression that contained my entire life, and he asked me one question. He said, "What are you waiting for?" I said, "I am afraid." He said, "I know. What are you afraid of?" I looked at the books on my shelves, my own books, the career they represented, the 50 million people who had followed me because they trusted my scholarship and my certainty. I thought about Aisha asleep upstairs, about my sons, about my daughter who was 16 years old and had grown up watching her father be a champion. I thought about my father, a retired imam in Mumbai who had given his life to Islam and whose proudest achievement was his son who had become its most famous defender. I said everything. He said, "I know, and I am asking you anyway, not because the cost is small. I know exactly what it will cost you. I am asking you because the truth is worth what it costs, and because you have been carrying the weight of knowing and not saying for too long already. The weight of what you know is heavier than what you fear. Let me carry it." I got off my chair. I do not know when I decided to do that. I found myself on my knees on the floor of my own office, and I said the most honest prayer I had ever prayed in 48 years of religious practice. Not in Arabic, not in any formal structure. In my own voice, in the particular mix of Urdu and English that I think in when I am not performing for an audience. I said that I had been wrong, that I had known I was wrong in pieces for years, and had kept performing certainty because the certainty was my identity. I said that I had led millions of people away from him, and that the weight of that was something I could not carry another day. I said that I believed he was who he said he was, not because I had been argued into it, not because any Christian apologist had finally defeated me in debate, but because he had come to my studio and stood in the light, and I had seen him with my own eyes, and I had spent 11 days examining every sin that could not be what it was and had run out of reasons. I said, "I am yours, whatever that costs. I am yours." The peace that came was unlike anything I had experienced in 48 years of Islamic practice. I had prayed 5 times daily for decades. I had experienced the genuine spiritual dimensions of Islamic devotion, the peace of Ramadan, the transcendence of Hajj, the beauty of Quranic recitation. These were real. I am not dismissing them. But this was different. This was not the peace of religious practice. This was the peace of a person who has been fighting something for 25 years and has finally exhaustedly, completely stopped fighting. The peace of a man who has put down a very heavy thing he did not know he was carrying until the moment he set it down. I stayed on the floor of my office until the morning prayer call came from the mosque down the street. The same call I had organized my life around for as long as I could remember. I listened to it and I felt something complex. Grief for what I was leaving, alongside the absolute certainty that what I had found was worth the leaving. The 4 months that followed were the most complicated of my life. I continued the show. I could not stop immediately. The announcement of Dr. Kabir Ahmad's conversion to Christianity was not something I was prepared to make in the weeks after the studio breakdown, when the official explanation was still a medical emergency and the Islamic world was still sending me get-well messages and prayers for my recovery. I needed time. Time to understand what I had become. Time to figure out how to do what honesty required. But I could not continue as I had been. Every time I sat behind that desk and began to present arguments I now knew were insufficient, something in me refused to perform the certainty that the arguments required. I found myself softening, qualifying, acknowledging that certain Christian arguments had merit I had previously not acknowledged, inviting Christian voices onto my platform with a generosity that my production team found confusing and my audience found unsettling. The comment section started filling with questions. The production team started asking questions. Ayesha started asking questions. I answered none of them honestly. Not yet. I was not ready, and I was not safe, and I was praying every day to Jesus, in secret, in my office before anyone else woke up, asking for wisdom about timing and courage when the timing came. The moment that ended the waiting was not something I chose. It was a moment that chose me. I had invited a Christian pastor onto the show to present the gospel, uninterrupted. 30 minutes. My production team was unhappy, but I outranked them, and I used that rank for the first time in a way that was not about my career. The pastor spoke for 30 minutes about who Jesus was and what he had done and why it mattered. I sat and I listened, and I did not interrupt. At the end I said, "These are points worth considering." 6 words, that was all. But in the context of 25 years of Dr. Kabir Rahman, those 6 words were as loud as a confession. The network called the next morning. My senior producers came to the studio. They sat across from me with the footage from the past 4 months already reviewed and annotated. They had been watching the pattern and building the case. They asked me directly whether I still believed Jesus was only a prophet. I sat in the silence of that question for too long. The silence was my answer. We all knew it. They terminated my contract in that meeting. The statement they released described me as having lost my way. My YouTube channels, 50 million subscribers across platforms, 15 years of content, the largest Islamic apologetics media presence in the world, were terminated within 24 hours. I watched the subscriber count disappear from my phone with a feeling I want to describe accurately. It was not primarily grief. It was something closer to relief. The relief of a man who has been maintaining a performance that was costing him everything and has finally been forced to stop performing. The relief lasted approximately 40 minutes. Then Ayesha came home. That conversation is the one I find hardest to describe. Not because it was the most dramatic. The family council, the formal disownment, my father's statement, the death threats, all of those had a kind of scale that made them almost unreal. This was real in the quietest and most personal way. Ayesha stood in our kitchen and she looked at me and she said, "Tell me the truth. All of it, right now." I told her, the studio, the vision, the 11 days of investigation, the office floor, the 4 months, all of it. She listened without interrupting. I had expected tears or anger during the telling, but she was very still and very quiet, the way people are still and quiet when they are receiving information that is restructuring their understanding of their entire life. When I finished, she said, "You have been lying to me for 4 months." I said, "Yes." She said, "You have destroyed everything." I said, "I know." She said, "And you are not sorry." I looked at her, my wife of 23 years, the woman who had organized her life around mine and built her identity as substantially around my career as I had built my own. The woman who had raised our children inside the framework of what I now knew to be insufficient and who had no reason to question that framework because I had been telling her for 25 years that it was the truth. I said, "I am sorry for the pain. I am not sorry for what I found, and I would give anything for you to find it too." She filed for divorce within the month. My sons, 22 and 19, both of them beginning their own careers in Islamic education, both of them publicly identified with my reputation, disowned me on social media within days of the network's announcement. Their statements were formal and complete. I understood why they made them. That understanding does not make reading them any less painful. My daughter Mariam was the only one who called me. She was 16 and she was crying and she did not say much, just that she loved me and that she did not understand and that she hoped I was all right. That call lasted 4 minutes and I have replayed it in my mind more times than I can count. My father released a statement through the mosque he had attended for 40 years. He said that the son he raised was dead. He said he was making du'abilis for the guidance of whoever had replaced that son. He said he had no son named Kabir. I read that statement in a hotel room in Dubai in the early hours of the morning, the night before I left the country, and I wept for my father in a way I had not wept for anything since I was a child. Not for what he had said, for what he did not know and could not yet know, for the truth that I wished I could carry to him the way you carry water to someone who does not yet know. They are thirsty. I left Dubai on a Thursday. I will not tell you the details of how I left or where exactly I am now. What I will tell you is that I am in a Western country, that I am under a different name, that my assets in Dubai were frozen before I left, and that I arrived with very little and have built a very modest existence from that very little. That there are people who want to find me. The threats have been specific enough and the parties making them serious enough that the people helping me with security have advised me to take them seriously. I take them seriously, and I am at more peace than I have ever been in my life. That sounds like the kind of thing people say in testimonies that are not completely honest. So let me be precise about what I mean. I am not at peace in the sense of having no difficulty. I am a man who has lost his career, his family, his country, his financial security, his public reputation, and the community of 50 million people who once considered him their champion. These are real losses and the grief of them is real. I feel that grief daily. My sons do not speak to me. My daughter is living inside a family narrative that presents her father as a traitor, and she is 16 years old, and I cannot reach her to tell her what is true. The peace I have is underneath all of that, independent of all of that. The same peace that arrived on the floor of my office on the 11th night and has not left regardless of what the circumstances above it have done. I am beginning to understand that this peace is not a feeling that good circumstances produce. It is a person, and the person does not leave when the circumstances become difficult. I have found a small church in the city where I am living. I sit in the back. Nobody knows who I am. Or rather, nobody yet knows who I used to be. I am learning what it means to worship rather than to perform worship. I am learning what it means to read the text I spent my career attacking as someone who belongs to it rather than someone dismantling it from the outside. I am learning, slowly and imperfectly, and with the particular difficulty of a man who has spent 25 years in the habit of being the most knowledgeable person in any room he enters, what it means to be a student of something rather than its authority. It is the most important learning of my life. I have things I need to say before I close this testimony. To the millions of people who followed me, who watched my debates and read my books and walked away from Jesus or away from the possibility of considering Jesus because of arguments I made with the full force of my credibility and the full weight of my platform, I am sorry. I do not have a word large enough for what I owe you. I spent 25 years using my considerable gifts to build walls between you and the truth. And I built those walls well because I was skilled and I was motivated and I believed I was serving God. What I was serving was my own pride dressed in the robes of God's service. And the walls I built were real, and some of you are still on the other side of them. I am asking you to look again, not at my arguments. My arguments were the best arguments available within the framework I was working from, and they were not sufficient. I am asking you to do the thing I refused to do for 25 years. Not argue about Jesus, not accumulate intellectual positions for or against his claims. Seek him directly, personally. Ask him to show you who he is, the way he showed me. He came to my studio uninvited. He will come to your room if you ask. To Muslim scholars and apologists, my colleagues, the men and women who are doing now what I spent 25 years doing, I want to say this with genuine respect for your sincerity and your scholarship, because I know from the inside how real both of those things can be. The question I never asked myself honestly is the question I am asking you now. Have you actually sought Jesus? Not studied the arguments about him, not prepared rebuttals to his followers' claims. Sought him personally, asked him with genuine openness to show you who he is if he is who he claims to be. I know exactly how that question sounds coming from someone who has just had the kind of dramatic experience I have described. It sounds like the question of someone who has lost his bearings and is asking others to follow him into the same loss. I understand that reading. I am asking you to consider another reading. The reading in which a man who spent 25 years knowing every argument and never once genuinely seeking the person behind the arguments finally sought the person and found that the person was real. To the Christian pastor who sat across from me in that studio the night everything changed, I do not know if you will ever see this testimony. I want you to know that your willingness to sit in that debate at a disadvantage in my studio in front of my audience and present your faith with genuine conviction rather than performing a victory you were not achieving, that mattered. I was winning the debate. You were representing something real. The difference between those two things was visible to me even before he appeared, and I believe your faithfulness in that room was part of what he was working with. To my wife Ayesha and my sons and my daughter Mariam, I know that Ayesha and my sons will not see this, and I accept that. But Mariam, if this testimony ever reaches you, if you ever sit somewhere and watch or read these words, I want you to know that you are the first person I pray for every morning and the last person I pray for every night. You are 16 years old and you are living inside a story about your father that is not the whole story. The whole story is this. Your father found the truth. The truth cost him everything except the truth itself, and the truth is worth everything it cost. I pray every day that it finds you the way it found me, not through loss and breakdown and the crisis of everything, gently, in a dream maybe, in a quiet moment, in the particular way that he finds 16-year-old girls who have been raised with faith and deserve to have that faith completed rather than replaced. He is looking for you, Mariam. Let him find you. To the church that has received me in this city, the small congregation that does not yet know who sits in their back row every Sunday, thank you. For the worship that is not performance, for the community that does not require credentials, for the space to learn rather than to teach. I will tell you who I am when it is safe to do so. When I do, I hope you will receive what I have been through with the same grace you have already shown a stranger who comes in quietly and sits in the back and is clearly learning something from the beginning. And to Jesus, I want to say this publicly because the testimony that began in a studio in Dubai with 20 million witnesses deserves to end with a public acknowledgement. You came to my studio. You stood in my space, you showed me what I had been doing and what I had been refusing to know and who you actually were. You did not destroy me in that moment even though I had spent 25 years working against you and deserved whatever destruction was coming. You looked at me with my entire life in your eyes and you asked me a question. I am answering it now, publicly, in front of whoever will listen. Yes, I see you. I know you are real. I am not going to continue denying what I can see with my own eyes. You are who you said you are. I know it with the same certainty I once brought to arguing the opposite, and with the additional certainty of a man who has seen you himself. You are the Son. You are not one prophet in a line of prophets. You are the one the prophets pointed toward. You are the Word. You are the way and the truth and the life, and the door is exactly as wide as you said it was. And it was open for me after 25 years of standing on the wrong side of it, telling people it was the wrong door. I walked through it. I would walk through it again. I will spend whatever time I have left, however long that is, in whatever safety or danger the coming days hold, walking toward you rather than away from you. His name is Jesus. He came to a television studio in Dubai and stood in the light and asked me a question, and I am finally giving him the right answer.